Redstone Estates was supposed to be paradise, at least. That's what the Martian real estate brochures claimed. Nestled in the Chrysi Planitia district, it boasted crimson sunsets, oxygen-rich dome gardens, autonomous shuttle lines, and a homeowners association that promised order, harmony, and community. What they didn't mention in the fine print was Karen Dresch. Long before the domes were fully pressurized and the Martian soil properly terraformed, Karen had been there, clipboard in one hand, surveillance tablet in the other. She wasn't officially on the HOA board. She didn't need to be. Everyone knew she was the board. Karen saw everything. Solar panels not aligned at the HOA mandated 37.5 degrees. Logged. Children riding hoverboards past curfew. Reported pets not registered in the biodiversity registry. Oh, that was a personal crusade. But today Karen had a new target, the newcomers at Lot 4 to B. They had arrived 2 weeks prior. Quiet couple, married it seemed. Their domicile was sleek, modular, clearly custom built. That was already suspicious. Karen couldn't find their names in the Redstone Welcome Registry, which meant one of two things. Either they opted out of community disclosure illegal without a formal waiver, or they had connections high enough to skip standard protocol. Both options irked her, but what truly drove her to action was the barn. It wasn't labeled as a barn in the registry officially, it was a multifunctional outbuilding, but Karen knew a barn when she saw one. Rectangular reinforced titanium composite doors, dual roof ridges, and a small padlocked hatch on the side. No open windows, no drone access ports, and most importantly, it hadn't opened once since installation. The HOA bylaws were clear. Structures with agricultural potential had to submit weekly interior scan logs and grant emergency override access. Karen had filed 2 polite requests, no response, then 1 formal complaint. Still nothing. She stood on her balcony, wrapped in a temperature-controlled robe, sipping mushroom root tea from her HOA anniversary mug. Her surveillance drone hovered quietly beside her, beaming a live zoom feed from the barn across the street. No movement, no drones coming or going, no sign of power fluctuation on her infrared scanner. That could only mean one thing. They're hiding something, she muttered. Her fingers tapped against the tablet with righteous purpose. HOA Violation Code 9B, Non-Compliance with Structural Transparency Ordinance. She selected immediate enforcement action and attached 3 high-res images of the barn, all from different angles, annotated in red. The report auto-routed to the local enforcement server. She gave it 5 minutes. At 6 minutes she smiled. A soft hum buzzed in the air. 3 police patrol drones approached, sleek in matte black, their red strobe lights casting long shadows across the Martian sand. They landed in front of the mysterious barn, extending small sensor pods toward the door. Karen leaned over her balcony, eager. Her fingers itched to start the HOA group chat thread. But then, the barn doors began to open. Not slide, not swing, but fold. Section by section, like petals of a mechanical flower. A burst of pressurized air hissed into the red dust. From the shadows within, someone stepped out. Not just someone, a woman, tall, built like she could bench a rover. She wore a black armored uniform with a shimmering Martian police crest on her shoulder, visor raised just enough to reveal a pair of sharp, unamused eyes. The patrol drones beeped in recognition and stood down immediately. Karen blinked. The woman looked straight at the balcony, her voice calm but amplified through her chest-mounted speaker. "You must be Karen. I've read your complaint." Karen's mug slipped from her fingers and shattered on the balcony tiles. 3 days earlier, the sun rose behind Olympus Mons in its usual burn-to-orange glory, casting long shadows across the Martian capital of Elysium Prime. In a gleaming administration tower that stood like a polished fang above the city's skyline. Commander Lyra Miles adjusted her uniform collar in front of the mirror. Her ceremonial armor shimmered faintly, edged with polished steel and embedded with deep navy blue trim, the official color of Mars law. Enforcement. Today was the day. A small badge box sat open on the sink counter. Inside gleamed the crescent insignia of the Martian police chief, the highest-ranking law enforcement role across all Martian colonies. It had taken Lyra 15 years to earn it, through orbital warfare, intersettlement, diplomacy, and more than a few explosive conflicts. With rogue terror, the job came with full jurisdiction over the Martian territories, including those little suburban colonies that always pretended they weren't under central authority, like Redstone Estates. A soft chime echoed in the bathroom. 10 minutes. To ceremony, Chief, came a filtered voice over the comms. Lyra exhaled, clipped the badge onto her chest plate, and walked out of the quarters toward the elevator. She had seen plenty during her years in the field: methane riots on the moons of Jupiter, android smuggling rings in the Europa Belt, even a standoff with pirates in the asteroid mines. But today she was more nervous about giving a speech than she'd ever been about a firefight. The ceremony itself was straightforward: a glass hall filled with diplomats, military brass, corporate sponsors, and politicians who didn't know the difference between a shock baton and a radio scanner. Speeches were made, medals exchanged, the oath administered. Lyra spoke briefly, firmly, reminding the crowd that peace was a privilege secured by preparedness. Applause followed. Cameras flashed. By midday, she was officially Chief Miles, but not even an hour after the ceremony ended, Lyra was gone from the spotlight. She and her wife Ray loaded their few personal belongings into a military transport shuttle and headed eastward, away from the politics, the ceremony, and the madness of the capital. Ray had found a quiet property listed just outside Redstone Estates. Remote, secure, and fitted with an adaptive structure Lyra could retrofit into a barn/training facility. It sounded like peace. The house was beautiful in its Martian minimalism, smooth black paneling, temperature-adaptive shielding, and a green pod garden out back growing actual earth herbs. The barn, of course, was Lyra's baby. It wasn't a barn in the traditional sense. It was a mobile tactical simulator disguised as a storage unit, the kind you could use for training, disaster drills, or high-speed vehicle repair if needed. Fully legal, completely sealed, and running a stealth field to avoid attracting attention from curious eyes, or so she thought. By the second day, Ray had mentioned a neighbor had been peering over the property line using a drone disguised as a hummingbird. Lyra had laughed. Let them stare. Nothing they can do. But on the third morning, Ray entered the kitchen holding her tablet, brow raised. "You've got mail," she said, sliding it across the table. "Some woman named Karen left a formal HOA warning in our inbox. She says you haven't logged your outbuilding's interior scans." Lyra took one look at the message and chuckled. "I'm not sending tactical schematics to a nosy neighbor with a clipboard. That's classified hardware." Ray smirked. "Well, if she escalates, what happens?" Lyra leaned back, sipping her espresso with a grin. "Then the report goes straight to the Martian police chief." There was a pause. "Which is you." "Exactly." They both laughed, but Lyra stood anyway and walked to the window. The barn stood peacefully under the twin moons, shielded and silent. "Let her file the complaint," Lyra said. "I'll take the call." Karen Dresch did not take silence as an answer. In her mind, silence was an act of rebellion. It was defiance. And in Redstone Estates, defiance was practically a criminal offense, especially when it came from people who refused to acknowledge the sanctity of HOA bylaws. The barn incident had escalated far beyond a simple non-compliance notice. After the Martian patrol drones showed up and stood down without action, Karen had been left humiliated. Her video feed caught the moment the woman emerged in uniform. We spoke directly to her and effectively dismissed the entire encounter with a single look. Karen's online HOA group had seen the clip, and they were split. Some laughed, a few sympathized, but many stayed silent. That was worse than mockery. It was a crack in her authority. Karen could feel it. She hadn't spent 5 years building a reputation in Redstone just to be overshadowed by some military transfer who thought a badge made her above protocol. So Karen launched Phase 2. It began with a community-wide bulletin posted to the HOI net titled Unregistered Enforcement, Presence in Residential Zone. It included screenshots of the barn, heavily zoomed, and a blurry shot of Lyra in uniform captioned Unknown Security Entity, Unverified Jurisdiction. She followed that with a live-streamed walk through the neighborhood, ranting into her lapel mic about security risks, unchecked authority, and militarized structures on civilian soil. She didn't name names. Karen was too smart for that, but she didn't need to. Everyone knew who she meant. By the end of the day, she had filed a second formal grievance to the HOA Review Committee and demanded an emergency board session. She also submitted a request for immediate barn inspection, citing Redstone Regulation 17A. Any structure potentially housing energy systems or weapon-grade shielding must be accessible for public safety review. Meanwhile, inside the quiet, sleek home at Lot 4 to be, Ray watched the live feed with a bowl of hydro-grown popcorn in her lap. "She's really going for it," Ray muttered, pausing the screen to highlight Karen's dramatic pointing gesture at the barn, like she was accusing it of murder. Lyra didn't look up from her datapad. "What's her claim this time?" "Something about you being an unauthorized enforcer," Ray said. "She says the community has the right to vet 9 HOA-approved security officers. She do realize I outrank the people who approve the HOA. Pretty sure logic left the room 2 days ago." Lyra sighed. "Alright, what happens when she escalates to law enforcement again?" Ray tapped her pad. "Already did. Just now. Flagged your barn under municipal violation code for failure to respond to public concern." Lyra set down her datapad and cracked a smile. "Good. Let's see who they send this time." 2 hours later, the house's internal security system chimed. A municipal case file had been routed to Chief of Mars Police, Sector 12. Lyra's name was in bold, glowing letters across the top. Ray watched as Lyra stood up, smoothed her sleeves, and pulled her badge from the drawer like a sword being drawn from its sheath. "You're going to answer the complaint yourself?" Ray asked, raising an eyebrow. "Well, I'm the designated responding officer," Lyra replied with a shrug. "Can't disappoint the neighborhood." A few minutes later, the neighborhood watched in stunned silence as a sleek black Mars BD hovercar pulled up to the suspicious barn. Out stepped Lyra Miles, in full official regalia, badge gleaming like a nova, and posture stiff as a lance. Few residents peeked out from windows. One dropped a garden hose, mid-watering. Lyra approached the front door of her own house, pressed the chime, then turned to face Karen's surveillance drone hovering overhead. "I'm here in response to a violation filed against this property," she said flatly, looking directly into the drone's lens. "Let the complainant know. This situation is under official review." By me, Karen, watching from her balcony with her mouth half open, realized two things. First, that her plan had just backfired spectacularly. Second, that she may have just started a power struggle she couldn't win. The next morning, Redstone Estates woke to a spectacle. Karen had gone into full crusader mode, not content with failed reports and ignored complaints. She now had a new strategy: rally the neighbors. She drafted a call to action titled "Protect Our Peace, Stand Against Unauthorized Militarization," and plastered it across every shared digital board in the community. The message buzzed on smart mirrors, kitchen screens, and even the lawn maintenance drones. Most residents groaned and deleted it. A few clicked out of curiosity, and a tiny but vocal subset known in the HOA chat rooms as the Covenant for Code Compliance showed up by midday. 6 neighbors stood in Karen's front yard, wearing matching visors and custom shirts that read, "HOA does not equal martial law," carried protest signs printed on recycled nanoboard, slogans like "Barn the Barn" and "No Tanks in My Township" written in bold Martian red. One even brought a loudspeaker, which alternated between Karen's pre-recorded grievances and patriotic music from Earth's early 2000s. Karen stood at the center, wearing a sash labeled Community Defense Leader. A drone hovered over her shoulder, streaming the entire scene live to a viewership of about 134 angry ex-committee members from other settlements. Across the street, Ray watched from inside their front window, sipping a steaming mug of blue algae latte. "They're chanting now," Ray said, dryly, "something about inspections and constitutional space rights." Lyra didn't look up from her tablet. "Let them chant, you sure? They've got kids out there holding "End the Martian Militarism" signs. This is peak suburban rebellion. I've seen worse on Titan mining protests," Lyra muttered. Outside, the protesters gathered closer to the barn, though none dared to touch it. Karen barked into the loudspeaker, demanding a complete audit of the facility. Citing community safety and psychological strain caused by secret structures, she pointed toward the barn, urging anyone to test the access field and reveal what lies inside. One of the braver protesters, a wiry man named Greg who once lost an HOA election to Karen by 2 votes, stepped forward and reached a gloved hand toward the barn's exterior. The moment his palm breached the proximity barrier, a low hum buzzed through the air. A ripple of blue light shimmered across the barn's surface, followed by a sudden burst of static energy. Nothing fatal, just a mild stun shock calibrated to deter unauthorized access. Greg yelped, stumbled back, and landed flat on his back in the red dust. The crowd gasped. Karen spun toward the drone camera and shouted, "Assault. This is what we feared. This is exactly why we must act." Inside, Lyra stood up and sighed. "All right, that's enough." She emerged moments later in full uniform again and crossed the yard slowly, purposefully. Every step she took seemed to sap the strength from the little protest gathering. By the time she reached Greg, who was still groaning on the ground, no one dared to move. She helped him up gently. "Greg, I'm Chief Miles. You okay?" He nodded, embarrassed, brushing dust from his pants. "Just didn't know it would zap me. It's a level 1 deterrent, standard for government-issued structures under protective classification. You breached a secure perimeter. You're PR. Lucky it wasn't set to auto repel." Karen stepped forward, mouth open to argue, but Lyra raised a single finger. "I've reviewed every line of the HOA's code," she said. "I've also cross-referenced it with Martian territorial law. You don't have the jurisdiction to inspect, override, or interfere with government's ancient equipment." "But you didn't even notify," Karen started. "I don't need to," Lyra interrupted calmly. "That barn has already been cleared through central security. If you persist in interfering, you'll be obstructing an active Mars police operation that's punishable by fine, detainment, or in your case, mandatory HOA re-education seminars." The crowd went quiet. Even the drone tilted slightly, as if unsure whether to keep recording. Karen sputtered, but no words came. For the first time in Redstone history, she had no comeback. Lyra looked over the group, then turned and walked back toward the barn. The protesters began to drift away. Karen stood alone, hands clenched, watching the woman she'd tried to control effortlessly reclaim the neighborhood without even raising her voice. By the following week, Redstone Estates had changed. The protests fizzled out, reduced to whispers on the community message board and passive-aggressive glances during club meetings. Karen, once the iron-fisted overseer of the neighborhood, now found her daily surveillance walks met with closed blinds and quiet snickers. The drone she used to monitor property lines and unauthorized flower beds mysteriously began malfunctioning, in circles or broadcasting static instead of crisp HOA infraction footage. Rumor had it one of the neighborhood kids hacked the control system just to make the drones play old Earth sitcoms on loop. Karen suspected Ray. Karen had filed yet another complaint about the psychological hostility she now felt in the neighborhood, blaming the presence of militarized authority figures for her declining quality of life. This time, however, the HOA review board had responded with a single line. "Your concerns have been noted." That was bureaucratic code for "we're tired of this." Inside the house at Lot for to be, the mood was much lighter. Ray had finished installing smart glass panels in the garden dome and was growing heirloom tomatoes in Martian soil with a confidence that rivaled planetary engineers. Lyra had resumed her routine of early morning training in the barn, now locked under higher security protocols but no longer hidden. The community, having seen the inside via a sanitized PR broadcast from Lyra's department, had collectively decided it wasn't as threatening as Karen claimed. It was just a high-tech structure with reinforced insulation, a gravity plate, and a few surveillance calibration units. Big whoop still. The mythos of the barn lingered in neighborhood conversation. Kids dared each other to get within 10 feet of it. One local blogger dubbed it the Martian Fortress and claimed it housed anti-orbital cannons. Lyra laughed. She didn't correct them on the first clear sky evening in weeks. Ray organized a neighborhood gathering, part barbecue, part olive branch. She called it Redstone Reset. The invitation was simple: food, music, and no politics. Bring a dish or just bring yourself to everyone's surprise. People actually came. Even Greg, still sore from his brief encounter with the barn's defense grid, brought Martian root chips and 2 bottles of recycled wine. Karen didn't RSVP, but she showed up anyway. She lingered at the edge of the yard, dressed more casually than anyone had ever seen her. No sash, no clipboard, just a plain tan jacket and slacks. Her drone hovered behind her silently, for once not recording. She said nothing at first, just watched the others laugh and talk around the fire pit, trading stories of Martian winters and misbehaving cleaning bots. Then Lyra approached her. "Surprised," Lyra said, offering her a small plate of grilled synth meat skewers. Karen didn't take the plate. She looked Lyra in the eye. "You embarrassed me publicly. You filed 5 formal complaints, 3 of which were false, and incited a neighborhood protest against a classified government facility." Karen's lip twitched. "You didn't belong here." "I live here," Lyra said. "So does Ray. We pay dues, we contribute, we show up." Karen glanced around, saw the neighbors laughing with Ray, saw Greg shaking hands with the same police chief who had once knocked him flat on his back. "I kept this place in order, Care."